Sindhu, how are you?
Great, Ryan. Thank you for taking the time.
Me taking the time. You're the one that's got your hands in quite a few buckets trying to do some things. So I appreciate your time. And as we were talking about, it's a bummer we didn't get it to work last week when I was in California. It was literally 10 minutes from you. Now I'm back in Minnesota, and it's easier, God forbid, across the country. I saw your post after you had posted about buying a company, gone through Walker Deibel's acquisition lab, and I got on it. We had a little quick call, and your story, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so fun.
Yeah.
So I won't hijack the fame for you. So why don't you just give us an overview of, where do you even want to start? Because you came here and you're just making things happen these days. So how do you want to tackle this?
Yeah, I really would like to open with, I truly believe entrepreneurship through acquisition is the ticket to freedom for many women professionals who are super high potential and yet are struggling with, how do I put it, like societal norms that essentially have them placed in less than leadership positions for their potential, right? So if there are women leaders right now who know they have the leadership potential, who know that they can work hard, who know that they essentially have the talent to be CEO, and they're unable to be CEO because some people above them will not create that path for them, entrepreneurship through acquisition is that path. Right. And for me, especially, I'm a woman of color. I'm Indian. I went to the best institutions, right? So I went to IIT Madras, which is the top engineering school in India.
Ooh, I got to stop you. I want to hear your pedigree for sure.
Yeah.
But I want you to tell, when you told me on this, if you're comfortable telling it, is you didn't you borrow some money to get on a plane ticket here? So you showed up with nothing, right?
I showed up with a whole bunch of debt. I'll leave it at that.
Right. Well, hopefully this is going to work. That's because
I can actually tell you a little bit about my story. I was born in a very small town in India called Nellore. It's a coastal town in the state of Andhra Pradesh. I was born to a Christian mother and a Hindu father, which is very uncommon for India. Indians are not only Indians have their.
I'm sure that didn't go over well, right, with the fam.
Yeah, Indians have their version of being very caste conscious, but I was born. I had no caste, subcaste. I didn't even have a religion when I was born. So I was this mixed background kid, and I was a girl. And my father tells me that the first thought he had when he saw me was, who's going to marry her? So the first thought that comes into the mind of an Indian parent is not, this might be the next CEO of 2 damn companies. It's, who's going to marry her?
I love it. You're going to buck that norm, right?
I know. So essentially, I'll talk a lot about societal norms, but that's kind of where our society consciously is. They're not like, hey, this might be a really talented child with a big ambition behind her, and really the hard work to get to some places. It's like, who's going to marry her? Because that essentially, if literally, I sometimes tell this joke that if a decent husband had come along when I was 17, my parents would have gladly married me off, right? Go get married, have babies, have 4 babies. By the time you're 24, you're done. Right?
Would you have sabotaged the marriage though? Probably.
Oh, do I even need to answer that question? It would have been torture for whoever married me. Right?
you just won the lottery ticket of torture for life, right?
I know. It also depends on your mindset, right? We just might get along if you were super supportive, but if you weren't, forget it. Don't even start, right?
I love it.
Anyway, having said that, my husband and I have been together since I was 19. So we literally are 21 years and going
2 years. You must have grown up quite a bit.
And we're still having fun. So, we're still having tons of fun. And it's mostly because, he really believes that I need to go places. And I believe that too. So it just makes the 2 of us, right?
I love it.
So anyway, the first thought my dad has when he sees me is, who's going to marry her? And then he realized that probably nobody we knew, right? Because everybody, the Christians were only marrying Christians, the Hindus were only marrying Hindus, whatever. So he was like, okay, she's screwed. The way I'm going to get her out of this situation is to educate her so well that she doesn't need a man in her life. So that's kind of when very honestly, that's when my march really started, I believe, because again, it's when you make a choice, the choice comes with a whole bunch of good things, but it also comes with a whole bunch of negative things. So in terms of the good things, like right from get-go, it was made very clear to me that I needed to study really hard, and I need to do damn well at my studies. On the negative side, I have images of, like, receiving a beating or two if I didn't make first rank in class. I had to be top of my class. Otherwise, I had like some serious consequences waiting for me at home. And that just kind of is the duality of the Indian living, right? Luckily, I did have it in me to be at the top of my class. And then I eventually ended up getting into the number one boarding school. So I was a 7-year-old who just got into 4th grade at this top boarding school in India called Rishi Valley, going to school with 9-year-olds who were in 4th grade. I was intellectually okay. Emotionally, I was a mess. Right? I mean, I just didn't even know where to start as a small town bumpkin in this very elite boarding school, having to like literally make it from scratch. But I feel like that experience really taught me 2 things. It taught me I was pretty damn smart. If I could be in a class with 9-year-olds and actually hold my own in terms of what I could bring intellectually to the table, I probably was okay. The second thing it really taught me was I was a fighter, right? I mean, I just wasn't there to give up because, again, like, even as a 7-year-old kid, my choices were very clear to me. I could either go back to my small town and then give up this elite institution education and then get beaten again for not getting first rank, or I could like choose to stay in the boarding school and really make something out of it. And I chose to stay. I dug in. And I think the biggest thing my boarding school did for me was made me a very authentic and intellectually honest person. And that's the biggest thing. The whole school was about just, are you like, sometimes in the Indian culture, we're more interested in saving face than getting to the honest truth. And this boarding...
It also sounds like the Indian culture is a lot like Minnesota, where everybody is very passive aggressive. So it's all about making sure everybody's fine. Then we're going to tell you how we really feel in an email later.
Yeah. So it was really my boarding school that taught me that you can't kid yourself, and it's not okay to kid yourself. You kind of have to lean into what your authentic self is. And unfortunately, I think it's actually fortunate, right? I'm a pretty straightforward person. That's kind of how I've been all my career, and I've not done too badly. So I'm like, oh, there is a path to success. It's a more difficult path to success because you do, Brené Brown talks about courage and vulnerability.
I love Brené.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, I'm brave enough to be vulnerable. I'm brave enough to be imperfect, and I'm brave enough to work harder than what's expected to kind of meet my success, right? So that's kind of, I guess, my DNA. So anyway, boarding school gets over. And now my parents, my number one parents, want me to get into the number one engineering school in India. And let me give you the odds there, okay? You have 200,000 students, high school students, writing this one series of examinations in math, physics, and chemistry. About 2,000 students get into these top elite institutions. So that's already a 1% acceptance rate.
Yeah.
And on top of that, about 150 of them are women. So I needed to be one of 150 women giving these exams across all of India.
Oh my God.
So, and those were the odds, right? And it was a couple of years of studying 16 plus hours a week, 16 plus hours a day. And like all I did was study, sleep, and eat. That's what I did.
Yeah, right.
And I got in. So that, and then my parents were like, okay, you know what? You're okay.
She doesn't need a man in her life. She'll be just fine.
She'll be just fine.
How did America and coming in over here turn into the picture?
Yeah, so essentially to come to the US, there is a beeline. So this is the number one engineering institution in India. And there are 2 successful paths out of there. One is you go to one of the IIMs and do an MBA, or you come to the US, and if you can't do either, then you get a job, right? Like if you got a job, then you were, a bigger loser than the rest. But I was like, okay, what? I'm going to be
decent paying job.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to be a middling loser. And I essentially, I got a scholarship to go to Ohio State. And my dad was very clear, right? He said, we have no money. We essentially used up all the money to send you to this elite boarding school and whatever, put you on a path. So you can only go if you have a full scholarship. I didn't even have money to buy my flight ticket. I had to go take a bank loan to get my flight ticket. And during this time, I also figured out that my dad had actually taken huge bank loans to send me to the elite places he was sending me to. So I was like, oh, it's not just my flight ticket I have to pay back. It's literally whatever. Like, I mean, I say this with a lot of pride today, but I bought my dad his first car, or, my family their first car, my family their first house. And until then, we'd been renting. We had been like going about in two-wheelers, which in India is common, but a little bit unsafe. But that had been our life. And I got to say, and obviously in my journey, I also set up my brother. So it's almost like because I succeeded. And even though I was a girl, I mean, not even though, like, I'm a girl and I succeeded. It's a both and.
Yeah.
I was able to bring my entire family into this new age of success that they still have a really comfortable life.
How proud do you feel about that? I mean, is that is so, I mean, you must feel awesome about that. I'm curious, like, how do your parents feel about it? Like, what's their perspective on it?
This is a real conversation with my mom last night. So she's like, Sindhu, you did this podcast about a few months ago. I rewatched it. And as I rewatched it, I was like, oh, my pretty baby who's so successful. And I'm actually going to send your story to the top Indian film directors so they can actually make a film on your life. I mean, that tells you how my parents feel about it, right? They basically think that my life is worthy of of a Bollywood movie.
That's awesome. Okay. That's awesome.
I know, seriously.
Thanks, Mom. I love it.
Yeah, and this morning I was actually thinking about it, and I was like, the number of interesting things in my life, they wouldn't fit in a movie, so it would have to be like an entire series spanning over multiple seasons.
There you go. Well, but that just shows you it's not a clear path, though, to success, especially coming from the odds of being a female in India. Then you literally take out a bank loan to get here. And what was your intent? Like, what was the gravitational pull? Like, what were you coming over to accomplish?
I think the first thing was like, I mean, okay, this is how it looked to me in my child brain, right? The thing that just kept getting stuck in my child brain was, if I don't make it, I'm going to end up married as a teenager. I'm going to have a whole bunch of kids by my early 20s. And I'm literally going to be married to a bloke I can't respect. And that was scary as shit. And the second bit of fear was, if I'm in this situation, my family is screwed because they don't have a safety net. And then they're going to watch their child be miserable. And then they're going to have to put up with this immense sadness. And like, if that's not a fire in my belly, I don't know what is. Right?
Yeah, agreed. 100%. How did you come to that awareness, Sindhu? And the reason I'm asking is because so many people accidentally fall into that and then wake up and go, oh shit.
Yeah. How
do I get out of this? And then they have the resentment and then the not imposter, but it's like I don't want to be in this circumstance, make emotional decisions to get out of it. What triggered you to be aware of that so young?
No, that's a really good question, Ryan. So, in all seriousness, the thing I was learning at this elite boarding school was honesty, authenticity. Don't bullshit anyone. Don't bullshit yourself. Just kind of like face the truth for what is, right? I think as a human race, we tend to prioritize being nice over being truthful and over being authentic and saying this is the absolute crap, right? I mean, I can bring up racism, I can bring up sexism, I can bring up like all these things. And I find that a lot of people kind of wish them away. Oh, I'm colorblind and therefore there's no racism. Or, oh, I mean, I have 2 daughters and therefore I'm not sexist. Without actually taking a deep look at themselves and saying, who are you truly, right? Like, and I'll be the first one to admit that I'm a brown woman and I have racist and sexist tendencies. Like literally, I mean, my natural tendency is to say, like, if I'm talking of a CEO, I'll use the pronoun he rather than they or she. Right? It's just, it's so ingrained into our society. So that essentially, to me, it's very apparent to me that that's me. I have these racist and sexist tendencies that I have to overcorrect for with mindfulness. And even as a kid, because that's what I was learning at school, the honesty bit was really, really apparent to me. So the first thing you asked me was, how do people actually become aware? Don't bullshit yourself, man. Like,
so how did you like understood, but like how like, what did the school or you go through where you realized that the pain, because, you know, you mentioned Brene Brown and she talks about courage, being in the arena, and it's like the courage to deal with the honesty and the truth. Like, how did you realize that pain, the short-term pain, was worth the long-term benefit?
I would say so that's actually a damn good question, because I'd seen my dad do it, right? My dad is the first person to be educated in his family, which means I have uncles and aunts who are illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way my dad did this was, like, he describes his own life where he was selling essentially soda water on the Indian streets, pushing a cart with no footwear, like he was barefoot on hot Indian roads. And he was describing this life where he would actually push the soda cart in the afternoon once his college got over, so that he could have enough funds to go fund his education.
Oh, wow.
And he would talk of this, and you know, the Indian soda water industry, they're hand built. There are no machines bringing these bottles. So you would have to manually put soda water into these glass bottles, and sometimes the glass bottles would explode in your hand. So he had all these scars from like glass bottles exploding in his hand. And then after that, he would have to go back onto the roads and walk for hours together to catch the evening movie crowd. That was his life. Wow. And to me, like, and I think the first thing starts with my parents honestly sharing what their position was, right? I mean, they were very honest about, we've had some really hard life. It was education that got us to the other end. And by the way, we're investing in your education because you have this weird mixed background, and that's your ticket out, right? Like, we don't want you to be like other women who are abused by their husbands, and dowry is a big thing in India. We don't want any of that for you. So if you can lean in, not only will you hit escape velocity from your environment, but then you'd probably pull up a whole family as well, right?
That's so cool. There's something in there that really caught me, is that it's telling your parents were telling the truth about how the world works. Yeah. And then letting you do your own thing to get out and handle your circumstance. And I think that's a lot as leaders, like leaders of companies or of people or of kids. A lot of times we're trying to shed people, and it's like, no, they have to understand the shit. Otherwise, how are they going to get it through it themselves? Yeah,
I would say like the openness and honesty from my parents certainly helped. But although I will say that it created childhood trauma, right? So growing up, the way I bring up my kids now, I feel like there's a way to build responsibility without traumatizing them.
That's like a way to break the link, Sindhu. Yeah, okay, that worked. Let's take the good and let's discard the bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly so, right? I mean, I think there's a way, and because the way my parents were doing it was, you were not at the top of your class, we're going to beat you. I mean, that to me is yes, it did lead to
the dictator, eh? That doesn't work necessarily.
Exactly.
Right?
But then the philosophy that I use with my kids is almost like self-motivation, being super aware of what your talents are, being super aware that we live in a competitive world, and how we're going to show up in a way we can honor who we are, and we can honor the talents that God has given us. Right? Like it's literally that. And it's a very nurturing, hopefully I'm doing something right with my parenting, but it's a very nurturing environment, I feel.
Yeah.
So.
As long as you're holding off on the beating, I think you're going a long ways forward. My dad, like uphill both ways with the belt was always like, you're not getting that. So we're doing our best as parents is what I was always told. So you get over here on a plane ticket, and the goal was obviously success. I'm curious what your definition of success was, and then how you did. That was great context into it, like your mindset and coming into America. Like, how did all of that unfold when you got here?
So my number one goal when I came to the US was to pay off my dad's debts. Like, literally, I had a single-minded goal, which is my dad has a lot of debt, and I'm going to pay it off by working in my 20s was just literally my single goal. And if I could have fun along the way, that was just like extra bonus, right? So awesome. I got into grad school, and obviously I was focused on being a good student, because again, the best jobs don't go to the worst students, right? So I was literally put my head down. And
that's even such a good phrase.
even as a grad student, I was earning a scholarship, so I had a certain paycheck every month. Even with that scholarship, I was the highest paid member of my family. So I would send a portion of that paycheck back home to take care of my folk and to really invest in the community. And I was just like, my single-minded goal from getting out of college is picking a career path that could do two things. First, give me tons of money, and two, hopefully allow me to have some fun. Right? So I picked up analytics as the line of choice, just because I was an engineer and math came easily and naturally to me. The thinking abilities did as well. And I felt like every company has data. So say, the oil industry is down, I could go over to the pharmaceutical industry. If the pharmaceutical industry is down, I could go over to the banking industry. If the banking industry was down, I could go over to the tech industry. Like, I just felt like data was everywhere. So I just picked that.
I mean, like the thought that you put into that career decision, Sindhu, like, I wonder how many actual people think about that are W-2 workers these days. Because entrepreneurs, it's always like the shit's gonna fall. Like, you're kind of get used to like the moving boat. But like for a worker to think like that, I think is outside of the box.
I mean, I did go to the best engineering school in India. So, I mean, I think we've established that I have something in my upper rack. But
yep.
like, I mean, it's...
the upper rack. I'm sorry, I've not heard that before. That's good.
So, I mean, I was, and literally, I mean, it kind of came from a place of, yes, financial security, but also kind of looking out for my folk, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So you get into like, how was your upbringing, your mindset, the success, your goals, and what success meant? How did that integrate and how did that reconcile against kind of the hierarchy climb of the professional world in America?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I actually had to do a lot of unlearning.
A very small, quick, easy question, right?
No, I actually had to do a lot of unlearning, Brian. Like, literally. I mean, what worked for my 20s did not work for me in my 30s. What worked for me in my 30s will not work for me in my 40s. And it was like constant reinvention to be like, what's the next version of me? Or like, what's a more authentic version of me? So essentially, mm-hmm. I chose data and analytics as my career path right out of grad school. And I went to Chicago. I worked for JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, a few of the big name financial institutions, and the mortgage meltdown happened. When the mortgage meltdown happened, I was an employee of HSBC Mortgage Services, and they were retaining all of the top talent, right? And they offered me this job that would essentially look at portfolio runoff, which is decide who gets to keep their home versus not using data. Yep. And I'm like, I don't want that karma on my back, man. I mean, sorry, but like, that's just a whole bunch of bad luck. And that's really, I don't want that crap on my back. So I and it was a very scary position for me because I was working in the US on a visa. So there were no jobs. Forget about hiring someone with a visa.
So you like, what a crazy position that you're making a lot of money. You were one of the top people saved and you still want out and then no one's hiring and you're coming from an industry that no one's doing anything with.
I mean, yeah, like I mean, I feel like, again, when people say, can I be a CEO one day? The question that I really want people to ask is, when shit hits the fan, can you show up? Right.
Well said.
And can you show up in not a halfway fearful situation? I mean, I was scared to shit. But then, like, being scared to shit for long was not an option. I needed to do something about it, right?
Yep. I gotta say, you know what squirrels are dead in the middle of the road?
Yeah.
The ones that didn't decide which direction to go. Isn't that the greatest?
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like, I'm a hustler.
Make a decision. Doesn't matter, right?
No, seriously. Like, I feel like I thrive. Like, you throw me into a bullshit situation, I thrive there because I'm going to fight my way out of it. Like, that's kind of when my superpowers like just start showing up left, right, and center. Because I mean, like, literally, that's what I live for. I kick myself out of crises.
So what did you do then? Where'd you turn to?
Yeah, so I said no to the job. I said, no, give me my severance. I'm going to like go look for something else. And I started, like, LinkedIn was coming up back then. I started a LinkedIn campaign in 2009.
Whoa. I
mean, I basically started getting in touch with everybody who I could respect as a hiring manager. So I launched this campaign, and I got a whole bunch of responses back, and also, like, a lot of people who went to IIT with me were in Silicon Valley, and they were like, you kind of have to look at this whole startup situation. So I targeted the startups as well, and one of the startups in Silicon Valley hired me as an analyst. So I was like, okay, I'm going to California.
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And so, wow, where were you living prior to that?
Chicago.
Were you in New York? Chicago? Okay, I was in Chicago, New York, or something like that. So what a different culture shift. We're going from kind of the banking sector and then going to Silicon Valley, which I was at one of the names of the companies was Silicon Valley XYZ company. But like, so in the heart of it, like, what was the culture like there? And then how did your definition, you had mentioned some of what, 20s to 30s to 40s. How did your definition of success and your goal that you were striving for change or evolve?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So, your first question was the culture shift between Chicago and Silicon Valley. The first question my hiring manager asked me when I got to Silicon Valley was the same question. How's the culture shift? And I was like, what culture shift? I'm in the US. I just moved from one city.
That's not like, what? I don't even understand the question. It's the same country, right? That's awesome. Isn't that so enlightening? Oh, that's funny.
Literally that was my answer, because I was like, coming from India, the whole US was like alien world. And I was like, okay.
Interesting. I gotta, this sounds way off topic, but I watched this restaurant entrepreneur in North Carolina speak, Sindhu, and he was Indian, and he actually has now got 14 locations. It's Indian street food is like his, and he said like people know Indian food, and they're like, do you have any idea how big that damn country is? Like there's like 7,000 versions of Indian food. And I was like, oh, I guess it's not just the shit you buy at Target, huh?
No, seriously, like in India, when you say a different region, like it's really stark, right? Because you don't understand the language, you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the mannerisms. But in the US, it's pretty homogenous from an Indian perspective, right? Because the language is the same. You have Walmart here, you have Walmart there. Literally. It's really homogenous. Your freeways here, your freeways there.
Oh, that's so great. So keep going.
Then you had a next question, which was my 30s and my 40s, right? Like how I evolved. So my 20s was all about getting my dad's loans paid out, and I finished it in my 20s, right? In my 20s, I paid off all his loans. I'd bought my family their first car, their first house, and I was like, I'd be proud. Cool. Like, this is damn good, and they're all well settled. And then it dawned on, and then I got married. And then I was like, oh, I need to buy a family home in the Silicon Valley. Like, let's see.
The cheapest place in the US, right?
I know. But then luckily, like both me and my husband, I think we're financially savvy. So literally we bought our first house in 2012 when it was
nice.
Yeah. We've since
enough said.
So we bought a house in 2012. And my husband was like, oh no, I don't think the math is going to work. We'll just keep renting. And I was like, no. We're not going to rent. And so we bought our house, and I still remember we kind of had to pay some mortgage insurance because we couldn't even make the down payment at that time because I'd been funneling all my money back to India. And so we essentially bought this house, I think with like a 10 or 15% down payment. We just like literally, I was like $10 in that account. I'm going to like move this over. So that was my late 20s where I was like, need to set up my own house. Then I became a mom, and then that became, I basically, I didn't want to screw up my kids, obviously. So it was just leaning into becoming a good mom. And I looked at my own example of like being beaten. And I was like, no, we're going to do things a little bit differently. So that was that. And all along, my career was instrumental just because I knew that, so there's been some research done. And essentially, the research says that daughters of women who work will end up working themselves, like they have a higher probability to work themselves. So I knew the financial independence that I had gained by working, and that was an example I had to set for my kids, and not like work in a half-assed manner, right? Like it's not like I'm clocking in at 9 and getting out at 5. Like my kids are going to see their mom really be ambitious, look for big goals, because it was very clear to me that that's what they're going to learn. If they essentially learn clocking in and clocking out and I work when it's convenient for me, like that's just a crap example to set for two young women full of potential, right? So I was like, no way, I'm just going to lean in and I'm going to kick ass. The second bit that really dawned on me was this, which is being a mom, like many people are like, I'm so focused on my career. I don't want kids or whatever. That's fine if that's who you are. But really what having kids does to you is it opens up dimensions that you didn't even know were there. So literally, I started leaning into just my emotional side. For an Indian engineer to acknowledge that she has feelings is a utopian idea. right? I mean, feelings, like, what are those?
Wait, I don't see the feelings in the spreadsheet. Where are they, right?
Exactly, right? Well, you want me to have like an emotional connection with the damn spreadsheet? Are you out of your mind? Like, no.
Oh, I love
So
it.
I feel like that really opened me up. And as I started to get really ambitious for my own career, I went to Wharton. The Wharton Business School. And at Wharton was kind of where all the leadership courses opened me up to even more emotionally intelligent training. And I had this conversation with the dean of Wharton, and she was like, "Wait a second. So you came to Wharton to learn feelings? Like, Wharton is known as the quant school, and Harvard is the feeling school." And she literally was like, she had to take a minute to register that. Right? But I'm like, if you're coming from an IIT, like, anything more than is really good training.
I hope you're enjoying the interview with Sindhu. I absolutely love her passion, her motivation, and her transparency and bluntness. If you are interested in learning more about acquisition entrepreneurs or more about how valuations work, how to actually purchase a business, deal structures, how to grow the value of a company by projecting out the financials, and how to tie operational data to the financials so you can grow the equity value of your company and have choices, go check out the Intentional Growth Starter Kit, where you're going to get the 5 videos from the 5 Intentional Growth Principles, along with the financial scorecard that grades you on how well you're running the company like a financial asset, along with the 5 videos that show you a case study on how to project out the value of your company, and along with the Intentional Growth full podcast archive library. My goal is to condense everything that you need to get started to understand all of this material that we're talking about constantly in the podcast, give you more context to enjoy the podcast, dive back into the libraries. So if you like the topic about Walker Deibel's Buy Then Build, I have an entire video section about Walker's book, along with Acquisition Entrepreneurs and Walker's podcast interview. If you want to go check out the Intentional Growth Starter Kit, that is in the link below. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you continue to enjoy the podcast interview with Sindhu. And you're like, hey, by the way, I said no to a job that was kicking people out of their houses from data. So yes, I'm actually looking for feelings.
I mean, internally, all of us have feelings, whether we acknowledge it or not. Like, all of us, I think, yeah, either we're in touch with them or we're not. So anyway, yeah.
Well, and actually, I'll comment on that. So it was like the last 2 weeks, I just got off a huge kick for, I was traveling around and I spoke to like 10 Vistage workshops. So the average size company between 20 and 100 million. And this concept of like, why are you doing all of this? Because the money, like there's kind of the money success is kind of got there to some extent, and people don't know. So yes, everyone has emotions because they're like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the definition of success? And you talk about this cultural undertone, especially in Silicon Valley. How much have you raised? How much revenue are you doing? You know what I mean? And it's just like this trying to grasp other dimensions of that, I think is very difficult. So I wouldn't poo-poo it too much at all. And I'm not saying you were, I'm just saying like, it's a thing.
I mean, it is a thing. Absolutely. Like, I mean, the quant stuff is super important. Like, it's a both and, right? If you're just doing quant, I feel like you literally can become a robot that's putting out a lot of unintended crap into the world, right? Like, essentially, if you're, I don't know, look at Uber, for example. Like, Uber was a super successful company, but it had its share of scandals in terms of how it treated women early on, right? Like, I mean, that's the kind of shit that happens when you're just not fully aware. And then again, like, I mean, if you're just like, oh, kumbaya all the time, like, I mean, you're not going to have a successful business.
Well, and it's actually, we definitely don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but I think it's case in point that the main conversation in AI right now is ethics and alignment. It's not about the algorithm. It's about how the hell and what does it mean to be human?
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so whatever is happening with AI, at least like as a data professional, as I look at what's happening, it's again the duality of it, right? I mean, I use ChatGPT literally on a daily basis, right? It writes my emails for me. It writes my social media content, like all of it. And when I look at the potential, there is no doubt it's immensely useful because, again, like if I hire an Indian social media content lead, that Indian social media content lead can now write US content using ChatGPT. It's as good as that, right? Yep. Huge benefits for my business, no doubt at all. But the access to it really worries me because I think of my dad, who was first educated in his family, and my aunts and uncles were illiterate. And I'm like, what's their access to ChatGPT? and how far behind are they going to get, like even further behind, because they don't have access.
There's a whole conversation to be had there where like it's going to cement the haves and the have-nots in a whole different fashion. That's a long conversation. I amen to that. Going back to, so as you're working on being a mom, being a good leader, doing a little bit differently, you're focused on your career at the same time. Somewhere along this path, you realize to have true freedom is to have your own company.
Yeah.
How did that start? Was it kind of an immediate thing? Did it kind of start to fester over a long period of time?
I think the precursor to that was admitting to myself that I needed help, right? So I was actually in workplaces where I felt like, this is my perception, where I felt like if my talent and my potential were up there, the work that I was doing and the environments that I was involved in were really compromised. Like I just wasn't in an environment that allowed my talents to shine. And we could say, okay, that's society or that's whatever. Like a simple example, right? At a recent company that I was at, I had been rated, I'd been rated a top employee at almost like every single company that I've ever worked for. And I'd just been rated top rated employee. And so they have a scale. It says, what's your potential and what's your performance? My performance was off the charts, but my potential was like, oh, you need to work a little bit more on your potential. So I'm like, okay, let's do the math a bit. Okay. I actually
you can go right to the math. I love it.
So seriously, let's do the math on this. You're telling me that my potential needs work. I am one of the top Indian talent out there, irrespective, right? That's just my Indian education. I went to Wharton, which means that I'm one of the top business talent in the US. And you're telling me my potential needs work. Like, I don't have the potential for greatness.
What was the justification behind it? Like, was it just lip service or like, what was it?
You know, the words that are commonly used are, you need more executive presence, or you need, So, or you need...
For the listeners in, I just kind of made a face like, what the F does that mean?
You need more executive presence. You essentially, when I kind of listened into what was really being said behind the lines, it just basically meant you need a grand old boys club behind you, and those grand old boys need to like you. And I'm like, okay. Like, that's what I'm getting. And while this is the feedback I'm getting, a top rated employee, right? Like, I'm getting these top bonuses and whatever. I go to my boss and I'm like, what does this mean? Like, I'm the best talent out there. That's what all my credentials tell me. What do you mean I need like more potential? He was like, why are you even talking about this? Just look at the amount you're making. Like, you're making amazing amount of money in Silicon Valley. I just gave you a whole bunch of options. What are you complaining about? And then while I'm having this conversation, a colleague of mine who's a level junior to me gets a double promotion and goes a level above me. He's white and male. And he's been on maternity leave or paternity leave for 6 months of the year.
God.
And somehow, like, when I bring this up, he has amazing potential. He's one of our top performers and this, that, and the other. But just like, you can justify any bullshit in any way you want, but then it's up to you as an individual to smell that bullshit and say bullshit, right?
Smell the bullshit. I love it. Yeah.
So I smelled the bullshit, and I was like, and I was already working with an executive coach at that time. So it was first, like, I'd actually been fed a lot of bullshit in my life, right? I'll give you another example. So I was a director. This other person was a senior director, gets promoted to VP. She's the senior director of sales and marketing analytics, gets promoted to head of analytics, VP position. Going from a sales and marketing senior director position to a VP position, the first question she asked me in our one-on-one meeting is, Sindhu, what's a lead? Is it a person or is it an account? Okay. So this is the person who's just been promoted to VP of analytics. And I literally was like, WTF in like bright bold letters, like WTF. And then like, I'm getting the bullshit of, executive presence and you need to like watch your tone and whatever. And this woman who just basically can't even differentiate whether a lead is a person or an account is now like head of analytics. And when I talk about like, demotivating. White privilege or white supremacy, like that's it. Like that's it. Yep. And anyway, so your question was, how did you recognize? So then I realized that something quite right was not happening, right? So I worked with an executive coach who smelled the bullshit for me too and said bullshit, bullshit, bullshit to me.
I love it.
And said, Sindhu, with your directness, with your authenticity, with who you are, unfortunately, you're just not going to meet your goals in corporate America. You need to go create a company by yourself. So I looked around and I said, okay, how do I create this company by myself? And I am a data professional. So I have and there's a clear opportunity with data, which is that many of the top data companies today, whether it's Snowflake, whether it's Databricks, whether it's all the cloud services, AWS, Azure, Google, like all of them are essentially like the wood for the house, the nails for the house, the whatever, the stuff for the house. Nobody is building the house itself, right? So as people are putting out data in reams and reams, until ChatGPT came about, the meaning behind what this data meant.
It's like having like huge oil rigs and not knowing what to do with the oil.
Exactly right. And especially even with ChatGPT, there's still a gap. And the gap is every company has an opportunity to organize its data assets to generate more revenue and to manage its budgets. But then because of all the bullshit that exists between how it's reported, like people don't have visibility into where am I suboptimally performing in generating revenue and where am I suboptimally using my budget. And an analyst can, so that's what my company Meaningful Data does. So essentially it optimizes data assets at a company to help other companies generate more return on invested capital. So that's my data company. And then on the other side, I was also like, the number. So with the data company, it's really important to find people who will actually do stuff with the data. If I say, here is an opportunity, I need somebody to go do something with that opportunity. Otherwise it's useless, right? The actions have to happen with actionable recommendations. And I knew that if I was waiting for somebody else to take the action, I'd be waiting a long time. So I said, I need a company that can actually do the actions. And I'm going to be the CEO of it. And that's why I acquired a second company whose growth opportunity was data-driven decision-making.
So like, let's unpack that too, because as you haven't even described what the company does.
Yeah.
Like to your point, every company needs that.
Yes.
That's what's so fascinating. When you and I started chatting and I was explaining what we're doing on finance, and we're naturally getting into this data world too, because it's like once you build the skeleton of the financials and you have the target normalized EBITDA, then it's like, how the hell are we going to get there? And it's all data, and everybody's data is shit.
Yeah.
So regardless of the industry. So like, let's talk through when you said you acquired, like, let's go back to like, why did you think so?
Like,
what was the opportunity that you were trying to?
So my second company that I acquired is a corporate events company. And people are like, why corporate events, right? Like, you're a data professional. Like, why? My dad asks me this all the time. I'm like, Dad, it doesn't matter what industry it is. It just matters that I have fun with it, because once I bring the data to it, it's going to be super successful. And that's it. Like when I looked at corporate events, I went through the same thinking. Every single company has corporate events. Like, tell me one company that's, on the map that doesn't have corporate events, whether it's a conference, whether it's an investor summit, whether it's a partner summit, whether it's an employee engagement event, whether it's a holiday party, summer picnic. Like every single company. And again, like if pharma goes down, I go to tech. If tech goes down, I go to finance, right? Like, I mean, it's the same thing as data.
The anti-fragile nature of the industry.
Yeah, it's horizontal. It's a horizontal market. And
go for it.
It's a horizontal market and it's growing at a CAGR of about 18%. And it's got a total addressable market of about 100 billion. So
okay, like that right there. You were doing the great lead into what was my next question. Sindhu, is that, was it Wharton? Was it what's the name of the Indian engineering school you went to?
IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology.
Yeah, okay, got it. So the IIT or Wharton, where did you learn whatever your level of understanding is on finance of what valuations and equity growth meant? Because like one of the biggest questions, and I'll just kind of give you the overarching question that I usually try to get people to, because is most people don't understand how companies are valued and how to create growth in the equity of it. So I'm wondering, did you get that education in school? Was it ingrained in the Silicon Valley culture? And the reason that the question is important is because why go buy a company? Well, obviously you're going to buy a company for return, right? Yeah. But like, I'm curious, like how all that thought process was.
If I had to put a pin on where I learned it, it was actually HSBC. So at
Okay.
HSBC was like a backyard for every, like, McKinsey consultants and partners who just didn't want to travel anymore. They all came to HSBC. So literally, I mean, I had leadership that was coaching me on a daily basis, right? I mean, these people are like super ingrained into junior talent because that's their legacy, right? So I was like having almost daily interactions with supremely talented people who really boiled down business into one thing. Business is nothing but how much revenue are you making? How much are you spending to make that revenue? And is there something left over? And as an analyst, like, especially looking at the data, I was like, that's simple math, man. Like, I didn't need to go do 4 years of engineering to understand that. Like, I could have understood that at 7th grade, like maybe 5th grade, right? So,
So like then like when you're thinking about I'm gonna go buy a company, and I know we're running, I'm eyeing the time here, and so you can kind of I'll kind of give you the next 8 minutes of how to kind of tell this story. Is like you go into the acquisition lab from Walker Dyble, because I've been talking at all these workshops that I'm going around talking about. I'm introducing this concept of acquisition entrepreneur. So like, how did you go about it? Like, kind of give us the overall summary of that, and like in whatever way you want to, because I just want to give you the free rein to explain it while we're looking at the time.
Yeah. So I understood pretty much because I'm an analyst, and that's how I grew in my career, right? Like the way I grew to be a leader of analytics was to help my companies generate that profit. How much are you spending? How much are you generating? Is there a difference? And how do you grow that, right? And I went to Wharton, which was a lovely fit because Wharton teaches you that on steroids. Because now I understood net present value, I understood net operating incomes, and the cap rates. I understood return on invested capitals. I could put very sophisticated terms to essentially what I'd been doing.
Yeah.
Since HSBC.
Like, these are the acronyms of what I've already been doing for 20 years.
Yeah, right. Like in a more sophisticated manner. And essentially, okay, so here's kind of how business valuation, and then I read Walker's book. The thing about Walker's book that really spoke with me is this. He's like, there are a million companies up for sale, right? Millions of companies up for sale. However, you as an intelligent entrepreneur, intelligent acquisition entrepreneur, you're not going to buy some average company. You're going to buy that company that you can grow using your talent. So that just like completely reduces your pool. And here I was with a tech talent, a data talent, and that just kind of meant that I could grow a company that could be grown using data, right? I kind of had the e-commerce skill set. I have the B2B sales skill set. I have a data skill set. And I was like, what is that company that I can apply digital marketing, e-commerce, B2B sales tactics, data to and grow like crazy? And that just narrowed the pool down. And then the second thing I was looking for is I don't appreciate bullshit. So I really wanted a company.
I love it so much.
No, seriously, like, I mean, I don't appreciate crap. So I was looking for a company that just wasn't crappy, right? Like you were running it. The sellers needed to be running it well. They needed to know what the hell they were doing. It needed to be scalable, successful.
And on a scale of like 1 to 10, Sindhu, of like how organized their data was, but you almost like, I'm assuming you'd want like maybe at least a 2 or a 3. So there was enough for you to grab and run with, like not a 10, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the company that I bought was, I would say, about a 6. So they had some data, so it was actually pretty good. But then the 6 to 10 is what's going to put it on steroids because they were doing the current business operations at a 5 or a 6 level. But then, like, you think about corporate events and you think about how that's scaled, and especially when the biggest problem people have with corporate events is, how do I measure its success? How do I know it's been successful? And as an analyst, I can tell you
data.
No, literally, I can tell you whether it's been successful or not. I can write the measurement plan, I can look at the business goals, and I can say, did it work for you or not? It's as simple as that. And so it just kind of gives me
You cut out all the bullshit. Did it work? Yes. Well, here's why.
Exactly. It didn't work. Like maybe if you did X, Y, and Z, it might work. Now let's actually generate a calendar for you of events that might work, right? And we'll measure that and we'll show you whether it works. And that's kind of what I can bring to the table. And where Walker's acquisition lab really, really hit it home for me was this. I went to Wharton. I have an MBA from Wharton. And yet when I went to the acquisition lab, whatever would have taken me as a Wharton grad about 6 months to a year to generate was fed to me over a few weeks. So for me, I didn't have to waste the time to go and say, I'm going to like go and like reinvent the wheel. Walker Dibble already created the wheel. I just needed to go pick it up and use it.
That's awesome. So like and that's a combination of how to find
I want
the
to say
company.
one more thing.
Yeah.
The second thing it does is Walker Dibble is one of the most connected people in the ETA world. So if Walker knows you, you know everybody Walker knows. And essentially, I got connected to my lender. I got connected to my, like everybody that I needed, like my legal team, my whole team kind of came out of there. Right. So
that's awesome. And he's given frameworks on how to find the companies, like you're saying, how to hire the team. And did you use an SBA loan?
Or like, what was the finance? SBA loan. Okay. And here's the third thing what the acquisition lab does for you. You can actually take your deal, create a whole presentation of what your deal is, present it to Walker and say yay or nay. And he'll give you your solid, honest opinion, his honest opinion. And the number of businesses he's said no to, I've watched it myself. It's crazy. So that's the third thing that happens, right? So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know we're getting close to the wrap up here is just because you said to me on our last call, the prep call, is like this being an events company, you knew that they had survived one of the hardest things that industry had ever had. So there was some stability that you saw in how that they were running it. Yeah,
there was some stability, certainly. And more importantly, like if this events company could have survived during COVID when all events went to shit, like there was hope.
Right. I love it. Sindhu, this is so fun. I gotta coming to the close here. I got a couple questions for you. One is that, well, what do you hope to do with this business? Is it buy more businesses? Like, what's your ideal version of success?
Public. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I believe that corporate events in the US. Okay. So the mission of my events company is to create joyful workplaces with deeply connected people. And we're not there yet, right? Like if you think about the number of companies that don't even have a family day, like, come on, man, honor the kids of your employees, right? Like have a family day where the kids can actually come. And that's how you create engagement. Like for me, at least right now, corporate America thinks engaged employees are optional. I think not. Right?
Right. I know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have engaged employees, like what are you doing? Engaged customers are not optional. Engaged partners are not optional. Engaged investors are not optional. So partner summits, investor summits, employee days, customer conferences, like this is like almost like, are you brushing your teeth every damn day? Right?
Yeah.
If you're not brushing your teeth, like go start brushing your teeth, right?
Then start flossing.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of what I hope to create. And really, like my aim is to work with Wharton professors to create that connection, right? Like how do you create human connection?
I love it. All right. Last question. The definition of the word intentional is a question I ask people to do because I love to hear people's definition of it. It's the name of the show. Curious when I say intentional, what does that mean to you?
But to me, intentional is getting really honest with where you're coming from. Like don't bullshit yourself. Don't bullshit people. Just honest and authentic.
I love it. Perfect. Where can people find you if they want to follow you, reach out?
LinkedIn is the best place. I try to be active on LinkedIn. I would say connect on LinkedIn, always looking to interact with new people. And also go to We Crush Events and contact us for your corporate events.
Love it.
Okay.
And with that, mic drop. Sindhu, thank you so much. And we'll see you later.
All right. Bye, Ryan. Thank you.